Kaido wants Yamato dead. Well, sort of. As we all know, Yamato didn't exactly have the best childhood growing up. Because Yamato openly admits to loving Oden, someone that consistently gives Kaido PTSD, and just because he's, well, kind of a dick, it's pretty easy to assume Kaido doesn't care about Yamato. But considering he's made a lot of conflicting statements, and considering everything we saw in chapter 1024, there's a strong argument to be made that this is far from the truth. That's why, in this theory, I'm gonna explain why, in some messed up way, Kaido actually wants Yamato to become Oden. Be warned that this will contain manga spoilers. Before I get started, make sure to comment with your thoughts on Yamato and Kaido. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week in the next video. This week's comment goes to Christ Nappa 4 for sharing their interesting take on Ryusui from Dr. Stone. If you'd like more One Piece and other manga theories like this one, then make sure to subscribe and follow along with each week's video. So before we get into the discussion at large, let's just quickly go over exactly what was said in chapter 1024. First, Yamato says Kaido always intended to kill her, and Kaido responds by saying the following: "This isn't a family squabble. If you want to bear the name Oden, you must be ready for war. This isn't a game, Yamato." Then, in the flashback, when the absurdly cute baby Yamato says she is Oden, Kaido says, "If you want to be Oden, then die." Next, when Yamato says that the samurai are gonna kill her as the child of Kaido, Kaido asks, "Aren't you Oden?" Finally, when Yamato asks why Kaido steals her freedom, Kaido replies that life isn't a series of simple questions with simple answers, calling her a naive child. So, how does any of this show that Kaido wants Yamato to become Oden? Well, we have to pay close attention to what's really going on here. As close attention as a Twitter user does when they look for anime and manga differences in MHA. The obvious takeaway is that Yamato wants to be Oden and free Wano, and Kaido disapproves because Oden was his enemy, and, well, cause he's a dick. But if you take everything that was said at face value, then you inevitably run into some contradictions. Specifically, if Kaido really means that he wants Yamato to die, then why would he make all of these plans built around Yamato serving as Shogun of Wano? Last time I checked, part of the job description for that role entails being alive to actually do the job. Okay, so maybe what Kaido means is that if Yamato wants to be Oden, she should prove it rather than just going around claiming she's already filled Oden's shoes. Well, close, but there's still at least one problem. While Yamato wants to free the people of Wano, Kaido wants her to keep the country running as a weapons factory. So that theory doesn't completely answer our problems. Okay, so again, how does this show that Kaido wants Yamato to become Oden? To answer that question, we need to establish two elements that influence Kaido's decisions: his perspective on death, and his perspective on Oden. Let's start with death. We've known for a while now that Kaido isn't exactly the happiest camper. He literally jumped off of a sky island and can be quoted saying that living is a pain in the ass. But undeniably, the most important quote to keep in mind comes from his battle with the Scabbards. After Kiku cauterizes her arm like the freaking badass she is, Kaido comments that he loves the determination. He says that Roger and Whitebeard did it right and that death is what completes a person. So when we see Kaido tell Yamato to die, we have to remember that this is how Kaido views death. But more on that later. For now, you might be thinking, what do Roger and Whitebeard have anything to do with the Scabbards? Well, Roger and Whitebeard both chose how they went out, knowing that their time was at an end. Similarly, at least in Kaido's eyes, the Scabbards have decided at this point to die fighting Kaido, knowing that this will be their final battle. I mean, you and I know they're gonna be just fine, cause, One Piece. But just humor Kaido here. Now, it should be noted that in a world where pirates live as they please, choosing one's death is an idea that comes up again and again. So, keeping this in mind when Kaido says that death completes a person, it's only reasonable to read that as Kaido saying a person is defined by how they die. Meaning, if you choose how you die, then you have control over who you are. And there are at least a couple of moments that help clarify just how much Kaido values the idea of death completing a person's life. He protects Jack from the minks after the saddest looking ass whooping in all of One Piece, showing that Kaido doesn't just believe a person should simply die fighting. Later, when Kinemon defends Momonosuke from Kaido, Kaido tells Kinemon to face his death like a warrior, adding that the problem with defeat is so few can accept it when it arrives. Here, Kaido is ridiculing Kinemon for desperately hanging on to his life, when it seems clear to him that the battle's already been lost, which ties back to Roger and Whitebeard choosing their deaths when they realized that their time was up. So this is what Kaido means when he says that death completes a person. When it's clear that your life is at its end, you should seek a death that properly reflects the kind of person you want to be, rather than throwing away your life or hanging on to it and running away from your fate. Which means, if Yamato wants to be seen as Odin, then according to Kaido, she can only truly do so in death. Hahaha, now you see where I'm going with this, right? But we still need to talk about Kaido's perspective on Odin before we can paint the whole picture. And this is admittedly much more complicated than his views on death. Because Kaido hates Odin, but he also clearly respected Odin when he was still around. Throughout the story, Kaido often calls Odin a fool of a lord, and right before their battle, Kaido compares Odin to Roger and Whitebeard, claiming that he's a fool for being soft. But notice, we already know that Kaido has some respect for those two, which means that Kaido must respect Odin on some level too. What's more, Odin was one of the very first people to ever damage Kaido. Now, whenever he's reminded of Odin's presence and that day Odin sliced him up, Kaido is immediately reminded of that pain and is filled with anxiety. Granted, he does start building a small immunity to it, what with everyone and their mother claiming to be Odin, the retainer of Odin, the successor of Odin's sword, etc., etc. But there's something else about Odin that still haunts Kaido. Just before Kaido shot Odin, he says that they will speak of Odin for years to come. Odin responds by saying Wano can forget about him for all he cares and that his soul will live on. This is an important moment for two reasons. First, it ties Odin to the countless other characters who also died and claim that someone would inherit their will. But it also directly clashes with Kaido's idea that death completes a person. In effect, this moment actually helps to distinguish Kaido from the rest of the One Piece universe, showing that he doesn't exactly buy into the whole inherited will shtick. So yeah, it's not as easy to sum up Kaido's perspective on Odin in just one sentence. Kaido hates Odin as his enemy, sees him as a fool, and completely disagrees with his perspective on death, but also views him on a level similar to Roger and Whitebeard and fears his strength decades after his death. If this were Kaido's Facebook dating status, and people actually still used Facebook, then it'd probably say it's complicated. Despite that, we can finally answer our big picture question. How does Kaido want Yamato to become Odin? Essentially, the answer goes something like this. Kaido is completely against Yamato becoming Odin, but recognizes that it's ultimately not his choice. Let me break that down. In chapter 1020, when Yamato claims she's going to open Wano's borders, Kaido says "you will not" and then says "you will never," reflecting his absolute opposition to Yamato's goal. So it's clear that Kaido does not want Yamato to become Odin. He hates and fears Odin, rejects Odin's philosophy, and has all these plans predicated on Yamato being around to keep Wano closed. But notice what Kaido says to Yamato in our first few examples. If you want to bear the name Odin, if you want to be Odin, aren't you Odin? Clearly, Kaido is giving Yamato a choice. Kaido's idea is that a person should choose how they die and who they want to be. So, while he absolutely hates what Yamato actually wants to become, Kaido wants Yamato to make that choice on her own, which is what he means when he calls Yamato a naive child. When he says life isn't so simple, he's hinting at his complicated stance on Yamato becoming Odin. Kaido wants Yamato to rule over Wano, but he also wants her to make her own choice. But he also believes you can't just make that choice by saying who you want to be. In Kaido's eyes, Yamato can only become Odin by completing her life, by doing so with her death. which is why Kaido wages this war with Yamato. If she truly wants to be Odin, then she needs to be like Roger and Whitebeard and make that choice when her end is at hand. If Kaido beats Yamato, which in all likelihood he probably will, then he's going to keep her around as Shogun because he won't view that as her end. So, this is what Kaido means when he tells Yamato to die. Even though he hates her dream, Kaido is trying to tell Yamato that she can only become who she wants to be by completing her life, and she can only become Odin when she is willing to wage war with Kaido and either kill him or take control of her death and accept inevitable defeat. Now, at the time of recording, 1024 is still new, so it's a bit tricky to make any specific predictions when this battle might very well end in the next chapter. Realistically, Luffy will probably come and stop Kaido before he can kill Yamato or throw her back in prison. And like I said, it's pretty unlikely that Yamato will beat Kaido. But here's what I can say for sure. In any event, by the end of Wano, Kaido will reveal that his plan for Yamato was to teach her this lesson. That, in his eyes, death is what completes a person, life isn't as simple as saying who you want to be, and Yamato needs to seek out death like he did in order to truly become Odin. In other words, in his own messed up way, Kaido was trying to be a father to his child. And that's it for this One Piece theory. If you enjoyed this theory, then make sure to like the video. Also make sure to comment with your thoughts down below. And if you'd like more One Piece and other manga theories like this one, then make sure to subscribe and follow along with each week's video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.